Hello and welcome to Please Don't Eat the Sage, a podcast dedicated to demystifying mysticism. I'm Michelle Shea Walker, your host, a professional intuitive, energy reader, and oracle deck creator, and these little episodes in between interviews are my excuse to dive in deeper to a topic that I talk about with one of my guests. So if you haven't been listening in order, last week we had 2 episodes, both an interview and a Total Betty Goddess card reading with astrologer Colin Bedell. And I discussed in our Total Betty card reading episode with Colin about how I don't consider myself an astrologer, but I do consider myself an energy reader of astrology. So while I don't know the fullest extent of houses or the calculations that go on with astrology, because it is a vast and very impressive field to go into, I do know enough about astrology to treat astrology kind of like tarot cards, and that there is sort of a buzzword or a trigger word for each of the planets, each of the signs that can lead me into intuitive messages. So that is how I work with astrology, and I don't think one is better than the other. I think they both have their merits and they're ideally used together. Professional astrologers that can give you the full picture, and energy readers that can kind of read into the nuances of the energy of a situation. And one of my favorite ways to use astrology in relation to energy reading, because I work as a Reiki healer and a yoga instructor and I deal a lot with the physical body, I like to talk a lot about the physical elements of the astrological signs, because each and every sign is connected to a certain area of the body. And these areas of the body can be influenced by that sign based on whether it is in your chart somewhere, or if it's just the sign that the sun is currently inhabiting, because we all are influenced by that energy. So it's a good thing to kind of have in your back pocket if you're ever kind of like, this area of my body's feeling a little funky, and you're looking for origins. Obviously, disclaimer, please go see a medical professional if you do have any questions about what's going on with your body. But I always like to have a little bit of insight into what's happening in the energy behind any physical ailment. So that's one of the areas that you can look into if something's going on in your physical being. You can ask yourself, okay, what sign is the sun currently in? What signs show up in my chart? And do they relate to this physical aspect of my being? So with that in mind, I'm going to do a brief little solo mini-sode and talk about the astrology signs as they relate to the physical body. And this is both based on research that's very accessible at Google. If you want to Google astrology signs and body parts, you'll get a wide variety of answers as to what sign correlates to what part of the body. But throughout the years, as I've started to develop my own answer key with the energies that I work with, such as Reiki, I have narrowed it down to what each sign means to me and the physical body parts that correlate to them. So again, this isn't the be-all, end-all definitive translation of the energy, but feel free to take what resonates for you and leave what doesn't, and do your own research to create your own answer key as to how the physical body and astrology play well together. So first up, we have Aries. Aries, the ram, is ruled by the head. So that makes sense if you think about it. The ram has horns on its head, but also Aries is the instigator of the zodiac. It's the one kind of charging through and breaking ground and really focusing in on diving in, sometimes without enough planning, but that is kind of what the head is about. It's about just being able to follow those impulses. It's about being able to use your head to literally dive head first into something, and to also use your head to figure it out later. So Aries energy is dealing with the head, not just in that ram aspect of sort of using the horns to barrel your way into a future or to dive head first into the pool, whether or not you know that it's filled with water, but also to get yourself out of any sticky situations that might come into play from those impulsive actions. So there's a beauty to both sides, and there's a benefit to both sides of that coin. That being said, Aries energy can sometimes correlate with headaches or afflictions of and around the head. So migraines and headaches are the ones that come up the most often with that energy, I believe, particularly if things are feeling stuck or stagnant, or if things have been a little too impulsive and you need to pull back a little bit. But there's also an element of the hair and the hair follicles, which is sometimes a little more Leo territory, even though Leo is not connected to the head. But if you are having problems with your hair, if it's thinning, if it's just not seeming to grow as strong as you would like, Aries energy might be an area that you want to look into. Are you feeling like you are being impulsive enough in your life? Or are you being too impulsive? There's always a balance no matter what element or what sign we're talking about. And the more you can strive for that balance, embracing the best qualities, but leaving behind some of the worst qualities, the more that you can strengthen this area of your body. From Aries, we move into Taurus. Taurus is one of my favorite signs to talk about in correlation to the physical body. I don't know if this is because I am surrounded by a lot of Taurus, or if it's because Taurus is such a physically based sign that this tends to show up more often in my experience than any other sign. But Taurus is ruled by the neck and the jaw. So the way that this shows up, because Taurus is very good about formulating opinions and plans of actions about the world and trying to really stubbornly stick to them for better or worse. Most of the time it's for better, because a lot of Taurus do have a lot of really intuitive energy, but they are known for being a little bullheaded. And the neck and the jaw are symbolically connected to this sign because these indicate signs of holding on to control and a stubbornness around shifting your perspective. So as an energy healer, anytime I'm dealing with someone that has complaints about their neck, it's almost always a sign that the universe is calling to them to shift their perspective. Maybe they've been looking at one goal or one plan of action for so long and holding so tightly to it that they're missing out on another option. Or maybe they're in an argument with a friend, a loved one, a family member, and the universe is gently trying to guide them to see things from the other person's perspective. This is a problem that comes up often with Taurus energy because they do so often think that their way is the right and only way. The jaw comes into play because that indicates a need to control things. So I say this often in my yoga classes when we're dealing with hip openers. Hip openers take a huge amount of surrender and letting go of the need to control in order to sink into them. And that's why oftentimes when you are settling into a hip opening pose in class, you'll find that your jaw automatically tenses up because the body is uncomfortable with that vulnerability. And so we want to control something. And the jaw is the easiest thing in the physical body to immediately feel a sense of control over. So Taurus energy, because they have this very bullheaded blinders, steady stream towards their plan of action, they like this sense of control. And so jaw tension can come into play when they find themselves in situations where they don't have as much control as they would like. And again, we're talking about both people that hold the Taurus energy and also all of us within the collective when the sun or another major planet is in the sign of Taurus. So this is how you can start to translate this energy. Moving from Taurus into Gemini, Gemini is ruled by the shoulders, the arms, and the lungs. And there are two ways that I see that this play out energetically in this sign. The first is that Gemini is very good at creating a sense of communication and community. So the shoulders and the arms are a sense of reaching out to that community and almost kind of giving the world a big hug, of bringing them in to this group that they're creating in the world energetically. And so sometimes when Geminis are trying to loop too much energy into their community or trying to pull people that aren't ready to be pulled into that community, they can develop arm and shoulder ailments. Likewise, the lungs are the feeling of communicating with the world, of shouting your communication and your story and your invitation to the world to come in out into the masses. So Gemini energy can sometimes have issues with the lungs when they're feeling blocked in this area or when they're overusing their ability to communicate in the wrong areas of their life. Again, both of these deal with trying to stretch out further than they're meant to and trying to reach out beyond the community that is ready for that message or ready for that sense of community. From Gemini, we move into Cancer, my personal sun sign. Cancer is ruled by the breasts and the stomach, and this is regardless of your physical gender. It's that area of the body that contains the emotional heart, but also the physical gut, because that is where we hold a lot of emotions, especially as a Cancer sign. And Cancers are usually very empathic. So the gut is where we process things physically in the body. When we take in food, we process it into nutrients and we then release it back out into the world. This is a feeling of doing the same thing to the energy around us. So Cancer energy is about taking in energy from the outside world, processing it into something new within the body and getting rid of any waste that is unnecessary. And that is kind of what the maternal, loving, open-hearted Cancer energy is here to do, is to be that empathic filter. That being said, the breasts are also that maternal energy. Cancers are the divine feminine of astrology. So regardless of gender, again, this is about energy. They are about nurturing. They are about intuition. They are about being receptive of outside energy rather than sort of taking action upon the outside world. They're transmuting the energy from the outside world and creating change energetically through the openness of their heart. So these afflictions can come in if a Cancer is out of balance through breast ailments or stomach ailments. Myself in particular, I can tell you that my stomach is one of the first things that flares up if I'm out of balance. And it's usually because I'm trying to please too many people around me, or I'm trying to do too much for the people around me and not focusing enough on myself. So next up we have Leo, which is ruled by the heart and the spine, but I like to see Leo as more the upper back area of the spine. And all of this is kind of going into one little ball in that Leo is ruled by good posture and all the things that dictate and are involved in good posture, because Leo is a very proud energy. It's also a very open-hearted energy because the Leos of the world are very complimentary, not just of themselves, but of everyone around them. So there's this feeling of being open-hearted, and that's physically what's happening when we have proper posture. Your shoulders are back and your upper back is strong, your heart is open, but in a balanced world, that heart is also still protected by muscle and bone and proper alignment. So when we find Leo energy that is in balance in these physical body part areas, everything feels strong in that posture. Whereas if Leo energy gets out of balance, we're still dealing with those areas, but they might not be quite as supported by the energies that they need to be. Physically, that would look like trying to have proper posture, but not knowing what proper alignment feels like. Being open-hearted, but not being supported by the muscles in the back and the core. And allowing things into your heart that aren't necessarily strengthening for the body physically or energetically. So Leo energy, again, whether it be within your chart or within what's happening in the cosmos, is about making sure that you have the strength and the alignment to support that open-heartedness before moving out into the world and allowing yourself to be that open. Up next, we have Virgo. Virgo is ruled by the abdomen because I feel like Virgo energy, being the very structured and stable and organized sign, is about finding containment within something that feels like a healthy container. So the abdomen is a really great metaphor for this because you can't really fake a strong core. You either have a strong core or you don't. And in Virgo energy, that structure that Virgo creates can't be faked. It has to be authentic. It has to be built from the ground up. It's a very earthy, rooted sign. So when we're trying to create the strength of the physical body around Virgo energy, it has to be something that's built from the ground up and is built on a proper foundation. So that means that the physical body needs to be properly aligned and properly structured and properly strengthened in order to hold that container for so much organization. And physically what that looks like, yes, we can get very boring with the recommendation, but it's also accurate, of building up the core, strengthening those muscles, and not even necessarily in a way where you're going to have six-pack abs, but kind of similar to the Leo support needed for proper posture. We're talking about the abdomen's work in proper posture in this case, and that it's there to support and protect the vulnerable internal organs. So you don't necessarily have to have an aesthetically pleasing core to know how to brace your core and be protective of what feels vulnerable in your life, which is very Virgo. So Virgo energy is about creating that structure that is protective, not just of your vulnerabilities, but of the things that you want to organize and keep into the place that they're supposed to be in proper working order. From Virgo, we move into Libra, which Libra is the lower back. of the body. And this one is definitely a warning for Libra energy not to bend over backwards to try and please the people around them. So Libra is definitely the people pleaser of the zodiac. They want everything to feel equal and balanced, and they want everyone to be happy. And sometimes how that plays out in life is they end up sacrificing their own needs in order to make the rest of the world at peace. And so this is a warning sign for Libra energy to not bend over backwards. Because honestly, as a yoga instructor, I can tell you that the lower back is super flexible. But it's also the most prone to injury because it's the one that we utilize to kind of make up for the fact that we should be using the rest of the spine. Or it's where we utilize the energy of flexibility without having the proper structure to secure and make sure that that area is safe. And the lower back is affected not just by the muscles of the core and the muscles of the back, but in the grounding energy of the feet. So a great analogy for this that I use a lot in my yoga classes is if you are working with back bends. Like if you're familiar with bridge pose or wheel pose in yoga, they're basically poses where your feet are part of the foundation. And the habit for almost everyone's body when we move into a back bend like that, where the feet are on the ground, is to spin the heels closer to one another as you move into the back bend, because the feet get distracted, they get ungrounded, and it feels like it's going to be easier to get into the back bend if the heels are closer together. But what happens when the heels go closer together is that you close off some of the flexibility in your low back and make it more prone to injury. So if you are a yogi and you're familiar when I say bridge pose or wheel pose, I always cue to the feet being parallel to the outer edges of the mat. That means that the heels stay behind the ball mounts of the feet and don't spin inward, so everything's in alignment. This keeps the open back a little more open and more receptive, but it also keeps the posture more grounded so that the lower back stays protected. And this is true not just in back bends, but in your standing postures. If you've ever tried to stand with your feet kind of all askew, your lower back takes the brunt of the pressure of your standing weight. So in order to find proper alignment, when you bring your heels of your feet behind the ball mounts and you bring your feet parallel to one another and you ground down equally throughout the soles of your feet, you then find that your lower belly has to brace and your lower back becomes more supported. This is a metaphor also for the energetics of what Libra balance is striving for, in that you want to be so rooted in your own energy, in your own stance, that then you can hold space for the peace and collaboration around you without having to create that extra flexibility in the low back that's going to end up injuring the individual in question. So Libra energy, my lesson for you, whether it be when we're currently in a Libra sign or if you have Libra in your chart, is to make sure that you have enough rootedness in your own stance, your own opinions, your own needs, that you then can use the support of that low back to remain stable rather than bending over backwards for the energies around you. And then by holding that space, you become an anchor for the energies that you're trying to balance out. From Libra, we move into Scorpio. Scorpio is ruled by the genitals and the sex organs. So it's a very sexual sign. If you have Scorpio in your chart, you probably are very aware of this. My Scorpio midheaven makes me very intrigued by burlesque and tantra and all kinds of sexuality. So I know that if you have this in your chart, there's at least a part of you that is calling towards that topic. And it honestly is a great sign to look into being more balanced in regards to your sexual energy. This could be both directions. If you feel like you're overactive in this area, and that is no sex shaming, everyone has a different gauge as to what overactive in this area is going to feel like for them. But anything that feels like you're engaging in behaviors that don't feel safe to your emotional well-being or your mental well-being in regards to your physical sexual nature, then you'll want to bring that back into balance by maybe taking a little bit of time to be celibate. Likewise, if you feel like you're being stunted or blocked in that area, you'll want to make time for self-pleasure or for playtime with a partner. And it doesn't have to be something that is just limited to being in a partnership, because Scorpio energy does need some sort of sensual outlet. So this could be physical self-pleasure, or it could be indulging in the thought patterns of Tantra, which we actually did talk about in Colin's card reading, which is about just finding sensuality in every aspect of your life. You can find sensuality in the way that you eat a delicious meal. You can find sensuality in the way that a good breeze or a patch of sunlight feels on your skin. And letting yourself feel just as ignited on all levels by all senses as you would from a sexual act is really how you tap into this Scorpio energy without feeling like it has to always be about physical sex. From Scorpio, we move into Sagittarius. Sagittarius is ruled by the hips and the thighs. So Sagittarius energy is very wanderlusty. I think that's the buzzword that comes up the most for Sagittarius, and that Sagittarius is about exploring both physical world and also new avenues of thought patterns and knowledge and ways of thinking, and that is a beautiful energy. It requires a lot of flexibility. So thankfully, the hips can develop a lot of flexibility. That's not true for everyone's body, so if you don't have super flexible hips, that's okay, even if you're Sagittarius. The metaphor of the hips in regard to Sagittarius energy is that there is both flexibility and strength needed to be protected in this area. This is true of any area that you're trying to cultivate more flexibility in. You always need strength in addition to the flexibility, or your body is not going to be protected, but it's definitely true within the hips. So if you are someone that tends to have more tight hips, that is a calling out to be a little more flexible. A lot of times the hips are also correlated with our creativity, our sexuality, and our feelings around money, as well as our feelings around emotional support. So as an energy healer, I'm just going to sprinkle that knowledge into this area of the signs, because if you are feeling restricted with your finances, or if you're not feeling emotionally supported in your life, that could also cause hip tension. And that also is going to cause a restriction within the Sagittarius wanderlust, because you do need a little bit of financial and emotional support to be able to feel the freedom that Sagittarius craves. It's really hard to feel free in life when you don't feel supported. So these hips are coming in as a sense of needing support in order to find freedom. On the flip side of things, there is such a thing as having too much flexibility in the hips. If you are finding so much openness and freedom in your body and your life that there's no structure to hold things in place, you can do things like have a hip slip out of the socket. And that may be physically or metaphorically, where you are no longer contained in a space that feels healthy. So there is a little bit of structure that is still needed within a Sagittarius vibe, but it is about finding structure that is very fluid and open, because the hips rotate on so many different levels. They're a very fluid joint. So it's not like we're talking about the shoulder here that can't move at all these different angles. So the hips are about being able to find just enough strength and stability to find all of the freedom of movement that you need to feel fully aligned with Sagittarius energy. From Sagittarius, we move into Capricorn. Capricorn is ruled by the knees and also the bones. So Capricorn energy, kind of in contrast to Sagittarius energy, as we were just talking about Sagittarius being about the hips and the hips being a very fluid joint, even more so than the shoulder, the knees are a very not so fluid joint. The knee has just that one plane of action, and if you try to take it out of that plane, you're gonna have some problems. So Capricorn energy does very well with a good plan of action, with sort of almost blinders. I get the intuitive image of a horse wearing blinders. And I mean this in the best way, and that Capricorn energy can be so driven that it's as if they have blinders on and they can't see anything outside of the goal. And this is beautiful in some cases and not so healthy in other cases. But there does need to be some of that forward-moving structure in Capricorn energy to remain in alignment. Because again, we're not going to take the knee and bend it in a direction that it doesn't need to go. It's going to go forward moving. It's got that one plane of motion, that one direction that it can bend. And so in order to work with Capricorn energy in a healthy way, it is best to have a point of focus. But it's also good to be able to open up those blinders a little bit, to have a direction that you're heading, but not necessarily a single point that you have to get to. So the bones are a great example of how this energy is coming into play. So if we think of like really old school horrible practices of like foot binding and things that were used to restrict the development of a bone, if you put too much restriction on a bone, it's not going to grow and develop in the way that it's supposed to. It's going to find different ways to form around these restrictions that actually ultimately don't end up being the healthiest for the body. So this is the metaphor that we're using for Capricorn energy, and that with the knees, we want that forward movement, that general direction that we're headed, but we don't want it to be so restrictive that it starts to feel like a binding on the bones that are then going to develop in funky ways. So have enough freedom to allow the bones to develop and grow to their full potential, and have a general direction that you're always headed, so that you know that you're not going to veer off in a funky direction and take that metaphorical knee out of alignment. Moving from Capricorn into our next sign, we have Aquarius. So Aquarius is ruled by the calves, but also the circulatory system. So this feels really important in that Aquarius energy is about the collective as a whole. It's about the way things flow through the cosmos, the general energy of the population, through humanity at large. And the circulatory system is not just limited to a single point of the body. And so Aquarius energy is constantly focusing not just on the self and moving forward, because the calves do propel our action forward into a future, and sometimes can do it at a faster rate, like we would for running a marathon. But they also focus on the full system at play. So in the world, this looks like having a direction, having a goal point, having a mission in life, because Aquarius energy can be very mission driven. And then also recognizing that that movement, when it's in proper alignment, when it's utilized to the best advantage, is going to nourish the entirety of the system. That being said, if Aquarius energy isn't in balance, it can be creating circulation or movement without a lot of forward motion. So the metaphor that comes forth for me in this, in regards to the calves, is restless leg syndrome. And that doesn't mean that if you're Aquarius, you have restless leg syndrome, but it's a great metaphor for that energy not being in balance. Because if you have restless leg syndrome, which I myself have suffered from, your legs want to move when you're supposed to be stationary. But at the same time, it's not movement that's being used productively. It can still be circulating blood flow, and it's still using the muscles of the calves, but it's not actually taking you anywhere. And so Aquarius energy, when it's out of balance, has a lot of this momentum, a lot of this energy, a lot of this phonetic motion, but it's not going anywhere. So an Aquarius without a mission is wasted energy. So you always want to make sure that you have some sort of grander goal in mind. And this doesn't necessarily mean that that goal has to be to change the world. Missions can be more personal, but then there's a recognition that that personal goal is going to affect the greater good. So it could be as simple as you speaking out about an issue that's very personal to you, but allowing the rest of the world in on that story, so that then people who relate to it can feel a shift and a change within their own vibration. From Aquarius into Pisces, Pisces is ruled by the feet. And this, I find, is almost comically true. I have 2 Pisces kittens right now, and they are obsessed with attacking feet. And a lot of times there is a joke going on that Pisces have a foot fetish, and that's not always 100% true. But the reason that Pisces is ruled by the feet actually is a little counterintuitive in my particular read of the situation, and that Pisces energy is so ethereal, so daydreamy. I'm a Pisces moon, I get it, that it needs to be grounded. Kind of similar to Aquarius wasting the momentum of their circulatory calf-based energy without having a mission, Piscean daydreaming energy is wasted if it can't be brought down to earth. So the goal of the Pisces energy is to allow yourself to be daydreaming, but know how to bring it back down to the physical plane of existence. And the feet come into play with Pisces, and they can be a really great way to ground yourself. So having a physical planting of the feet on the earth, even a foot massage is a great way to physically bring yourself back into the sensation of having feet that are connected to the physical planet or connected to something solid. And that is going to remind you that all of that beautiful, beautiful, daydreamy, manifesting Piscean energy can't go anywhere in the real world unless you bring it down to earth. So I hope that this little brief overview of the energy of astrology has helped you in some way. If you want to know more about the energetics of the body, I offer one-on-one body sessions where I do a little bit of Reiki, a little bit of intuitive insights to what's happening in your physical body, and give you holistic recommendations to find more balance. You can find more about that over at michellesheawalker.com. And if you want to know more about my own energetic read of astrology, as I said in my interview with Colin, I do a little energy read at the beginning of every month over on my Patreon. And to that degree, I'm also very soon offering an astrology-based yoga practice over on my website. And I'll have more information about that in the coming months. But if you want to be the first to know about it, head over to the website and sign up for my newsletter. And that will be where I announce the official launch of this astrology-based yoga offering. This episode of Please Don't Eat the Sage was brought to you in part by my Patreon members. So I'd like to thank Ashley, Laura, Caitlin, Amanda, and Karen. If you'd like to join their ranks, you can do so over at patreon.com/Michelle Shea. You can also support this podcast by pre-ordering your own copy of the Total Betty Goddess deck, or head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review.